Hey, we're back. Sean's here. Bring him in. Sean, you ready to go?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, we're talking about the Department of Housing and Community Development's current registry and the overall mobile home landscape. So go ahead, Sean, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. And forgive me for not being there in person. I'm feeling a little under the weather and trying to be respectful and protective of everyone.
Do you need to, do you need to share your screen also, or?
I don't think so. I think I'll be relatively brief because I have a hard stop at 3 and I do want to make sure that you all have time for dialogue.
Okay.
So for folks, I guess for the record, is Sean Gilpin with the Department of Housing and Community Development. I currently oversee the housing division. And just for context, I actually prior to this role, which I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary, which is blowing my mind. I actually worked at the mobile home program at CVOEO, where Sandrine is overseeing now, and was there for 4 years. So, and actually worked with Dan Baker and Kelly Hamshaw during my undergraduate. So I've been steeped in mobile home park issues for quite some time. So I'm actually going to be giving some info from, I did send out an email. I tried to send it to the group. I don't know if it went out to everybody or just to Representative Taylor. But I did provide some links to the website that our department keeps, that includes the mobile home park registry, which, as Mr. Fitzpatrick mentioned, all mobile home park owners are required to register with our department and provide a fee or send us a fee each year. So we're in the midst, they're due September 1. And so my colleague, Arthur Hamlin, who's another great veteran of mobile home park issues. Arthur's been with our department as the housing program coordinator and almost exclusively works primarily with mobile home park issues. And he's been with our department, I think, for going on, I think he's approaching 30 years. And prior to that, he actually worked for CVOEO's mobile home program as well. So it's quite the pipeline into our department. But yeah, Arthur's been working with, he's a name that you'll hear over and over whenever dealing with Vermont's mobile home park issues, as he's been working on them for a long time. So Arthur collects this data every year, and we ask for things like, obviously park name and town, the number of lots that are in the park, how many lots are occupied, how many are vacant. There's some nuance about like reasons for vacancy, whether the parks provide water, sewer, or are connected to town water and sewer. Various other things that are included in the, whether trash and recycling pickup is included in the rent, snow removal, those sort of things. Also ask for the lot rents, which is probably the most interesting piece of information, or the most pertinent piece of information. We keep this year on year, and every 3 years, Arthur puts together kind of a more detailed report. It actually used to be a report that was required by the legislature. That requirement actually sunset, I think, back in the Douglas administration. However, it's been such a popular report that Arthur keeps putting it together every couple of years anyway. Since we often end up, particularly at the beginning of a biennium, in the committee rooms dealing with housing issues, talking about mobile home parks. So needless to say, this is an ongoing, the status of Vermont's mobile homes generally is something that in my time, it feels like a bit of a sine wave where it gets a lot of attention for a little bit and then kind of fades into the background again, and then comes up. So this is definitely not the first time that folks have been delving in, although I do notice, along with just housing more generally, there seems to be a much more concerted effort of truly diving deep and understanding what issues might need to change, in large part because this is some of our most affordable housing and it's some of our least subsidized housing in the state. So that is to say, it's very sort of small a affordable, in the sense that it's housing that comes at a lower cost than most, but it does not receive a whole lot of public assistance. I'm not going to say it doesn't receive any, because certainly I know Polly's in the room here from VHCB. They do some investment and have done a lot into investing in the capacity to acquire parks, particularly to preserve parks that are up for sale, or potentially at risk of closure. But by and large, I mean, on a per unit basis, it's a housing type that has received far less attention and public funding than some others. So with that, I'm going to go through a couple stats and then frankly kind of open it up for questions, because we can go a lot of different directions, as Mr. Fitzpatrick says. We could go on for hours. I dare say you could have an entire career in this. Right now, according to the 2022 registry report, which is what I was mentioning earlier, and that's the most recent we have. Arthur's going to be, he's hunting down the last few folks who haven't registered their parks for this year, but we had 238 parks in 2022, and that number is actually going to go up by one, because there's a gentleman who is actually adding 2 mobile home lots onto a property that currently has 2 mobile homes on it. So it will be technically a new park, although not substantially changing our system here. That number, that 238, has remained relatively steady over the years. We haven't had most of the mobile home park development happened in the late 60s and into the 70s. A few were done in the 80s, and I think the most recent significant park creation was in early 1990s. We actually, if one were to put all of the, if one were to dig and look at the number of parks over time, you'll see a little blip right after 2011. And the only reason for that is because after Irene, we actually found a couple parks that should have been registering that hadn't been registering for a number of years. So that blip is an anomaly that identifies our finding of parks rather than new park development. And actually, a fun little fact that I like to bring up when talking about this stuff is, if you were to take a outline drawing of Vermont and plot all the mobile home parks, you'd actually do a pretty good job of seeing all the major roadways. Part of that is because they were built in places where it was easy to, transport and move a mobile home. But part of it is also a number of our parks were built as temporary worker housing for the construction of 89 and 91 and a couple of the other state highways, and then were never decommissioned. And so that's just a interesting little tidbit. So out of those 238 parks, there are 7,094 lots, so a little over 7,000 homes. We actually are in a point right now where we're at a point where the number of lots that are in nonprofit or co-op ownership versus in for-profit ownership are actually almost at parity. That's not the number of parks, but the number of lots that are in nonprofit or co-op ownership is about 50% of the lots in the state. We saw, as Mr. Fitzpatrick mentioned, during the sale notice, during that 45-day period, residents have an opportunity, and we actually reach out during that sale notice period to engage residents about their rights to identify either the option to purchase the parks as a cooperative under resident ownership, or to identify a nonprofit entity excuse me, a nonprofit entity that they want to engage with to purchase the park on their behalf. Historically, because of the robustness of nonprofit organizations in the state, that had been the route that most of the parks that were viable for some type of preservation or nonprofit ownership have gone that route, have gone the route of engaging. And these would be folks like actually the biggest one is Housing Foundation Incorporated, which is associated with the Vermont State Housing Authority. It's a separate entity, but is pretty well intertwined with VSHA. They actually are currently the #1 largest owner of parks in Vermont. I believe they have, I want to say 20. It's between 17 and 20. Twin Pines Housing Trust, Rutland area or Randolph Area Community Development Corporation. Some of these smaller nonprofits have also purchased parks as well to maintain them as affordable. During the sort of late aughts into 2010 and 11, we were finding that many of the nonprofits were financially unable to pick up these parks. So CBOEO, at that time I was working for that organization, and we actually reached out to a nationwide cooperative development organization outfit called they go by Resident Owned Communities, ROC USA. And we connected with a local or regional service provider called the Community Development Institute, which goes by CDI, and actually invited them into the state to look into the feasibility of engaging with the co-op ownership option. Because prior to that, we would go to the community meetings and talk to residents about what their options were to preserve the parks. And we said, you can go the nonprofit route or the co-op route, but there's nobody really to help with co-op. And now there is. Although I'll get to a moment some of the challenges if you'd like of where we're at there. Since 2011, we've seen a pretty significant uptick in the number of parks that have gone the co-op option, the resident owned option, and I think we're now up to 22 parks that are resident owned. I will say most of the was there? No. Okay, so most of the larger parks in Vermont. So just for context, I think on the national news, you'll see articles about hedge funds or major property developers, the BlackRocks, Blackstones of the world, coming in and buying large parks. Vermont, unlike say your South Carolina or your Florida, where there are enormous parks that would rival the population of some of our municipalities. We don't have that in Vermont. I mean, a park that is 100 lots would be considered small in most places. That is a big park for Vermont. A lot of what is still in for-profit hands right now are parks that are less than 20 units. And I would venture to guess that the average is probably closer to 15, which can be pretty difficult if you're trying to do, a resident owned cooperative that relies on, a lot of volunteerism. And, the margins, the profit margins for a lot of these fixed costs of having, the infrastructure in parks when they're that small can be difficult, especially with, increasing prices of everything that goes into housing maintenance and development. So sorry, that was a little tangent, but it speaks to the cost of mobile home parks. So right now, or I should say in 2022, the state median lot rent, so not the cost that a homeowner would pay just to lease the land underneath the lot, is about $370 a month. That's been steadily increasing. It varies pretty widely from there are some places where it's as little as $210 a month. Some places, some parks are approaching 530. And so there's a pretty big disparity. And one thing that, you know, if Arthur were here, he would definitely point out is the lot rent mediation mechanism that was explained earlier. Was probably made a lot of sense when it was first put into place. We're starting to see that it might need to be something that ought to be addressed, because naturally when you're taking when you're increasing rents as a percentage of the existing rent, you're going to see you know, it becomes compounding. So when we see a lot rent increase that's, you know, 3% on $200 lot rent versus 3% on $500 lot rent, you know, it starts to become pretty significant increases for some of our more expensive parks. Typically, that mediation threshold in the pre-pandemic times had averaged around probably 2.5% a year for that mediation threshold. And I do think it's important to point out that um, it is not rent control. A park owner in any given year can raise the rent as much as they want. The only thing that our law does right now is if it's above that CPI plus 1% rate, then the residents have the option of, you know, compelling the park owner to negotiate. But that is it. You know, there's no. A lot of times you hear the term rent control, and that's not an accurate way to describe what protections we have. I would say in most cases when a mediation does come up, in my experience, they're typically a successful, you know, using air quotes here, a successful mediation with residents usually results in a slight reduction in the proposed rent increase or none at all, but they often, the residents are often at that point able to really get into, you know, into writing some stipulations about different maintenance requirements that they'd like to see the rent go towards. I'm happy to get into lot rent mediation and that whole process at another time if that's helpful. So the mediation threshold historically had been around 2% in any given year. That has been blown away since COVID because of, you know, the CPI being the anchor, and with the inflation that we've seen last year, the lot rent or I guess for this current, the lot rent mediation threshold was over 8%. This coming year, it's going to be over 6%. So we're actually seeing some pretty significant, you know, increases coming in that are still well below the mediation threshold. So I wonder if this task force would be interested in considering what would be a reasonable measure for allowing for that mediation. Most of the, or I shouldn't say most, it's actually just slightly less than a majority of parks, but about 125 parks on any of the 238 that we have, about 125 on any given year issue a lot rent increase. There are many that automatically increase rents right up to below the threshold. There have only been 2 mediation cases since 2019. So just putting that out there. Let's see. Right now, we're seeing a vacancy rate in the parks of about 4.6%, and that encompasses about 328 lots. Although I should point out that there are pretty wild geographic disparities. There are Washington County. I think you could probably count on both hands how many empty lots there are in the established parks, whereas there are some parks up in the Northeast Kingdom that, you know, a majority of the lots are empty. I'm happy to provide some information about mobile home sales. We do keep track of some of this. We also use census data as well. In 2022, the average sale price of a new mobile home was 107. A new mobile home that was purchased by somebody who cited it in Vermont well, the average price was $107,800, and that varied from, you know, 77,000 for single wide to 125,000 for a double wide. Used mobile homes typically come in dramatically less. The average price for a pre-owned mobile home last year was just shy of $50,000. The health and wellness of said homes is often questionable. New homes, right now, we have actually found, and Arthur can confirm this when I next speak with him, but we've seen about a 30% increase in price over the last 3 years. So just like with all other housing types, mobile home costs, the cost of a manufactured home are going up, and stock is limited. So I think I might go ahead and stop there and ask if folks have questions or would like me to go in depth on anything else. I recognize we're getting close to time here.
Okay.
I guess,
Go ahead.
just a couple questions. Thanks, this is great information. Do you have a list in your head that you could give us at some point soon of what you see the major issues to be?
Certainly, and I would definitely encourage, I know Sandrine's on the phone, but
Yes.
I would definitely encourage outreach to CVOEO for that list as well. You know, we always have to, yes, I'll leave it at that.
I was gonna ask her and also Mary,
Yes.
for that. And then, I mean, I have a million questions, but I'm only gonna ask two. So that was one. And then the other one is, do you see DHCD as the logical place for storing data?
I think it does make sense for us to store the data just because we've got, you know, so that that $12 fee that was mentioned earlier, that actually just recent, well, no, I guess it's not recent anymore, goodness. It was a couple of years ago, but for a long time it had been $9. It got pushed up to 12 a few years ago. That actually goes to, it used to cover all of Arthur's services. You know, now it does not with healthcare costs and whatnot. But so we already have that part of the reason why a fee is charged is to make sure that our department can maintain those records. So it certainly makes sense for us to kind of continue to be the data hub, if you will. You know, we integrate pretty succinctly with Vermont Housing Finance Agency. I don't know if you guys are aware of the housingdata.org website or the community, particularly the community profiles on there. It's a VHFA website that we, with a different source of funding, helps them update pretty significantly, and we fund them on a somewhat regular basis to make improvements to that. So a lot of the information that we keep is also available with a slew of other things on that website. So I think, yeah, certainly for data, we're prepared to continue carrying that role. And I'm sorry, was there another question that I'm?
No, the first question was just, if you could please give us a list
Yes,
of what you think are the highest priority. That would
certainly.
be really helpful to me.
Yeah, and I will say, I actually, if I might take another 90 seconds or so. So one of the issues that we're seeing right now is that we're getting back to a point where when parks come up for sale, there are not a lot of options for people. I hope that this group can speak with some folks, some of the technical assistance providers from CDI, the Cooperative Development Institute. They've kind of gotten to a point where they're realizing that there is a lot of difficulty with preserving some of these smaller parks for a number of reasons, not least of which are, you know, like I'd mentioned, the volunteer nature of, you know, a resident-owned cooperative with a small population of residents is difficult, but also a lot of these parks are, I mean, they're all aging. The infrastructure has largely been minimally maintained. We're seeing the age of, and I mentioned this to Representative Taylor when we spoke a couple weeks ago, the other week. The age of park owners is the average age of park owners, just like, you know, many things in this state, is progressing quickly. And we're seeing a lot of, I mean, not a lot is a relative term, but in the past couple of years, there have been several parks where the owner has passed and the park actually ends up in a state, and there's real difficulty trying to get a you know, to maintain the standards and the requirements of habitability when there's, you know, the owner is a legal entity and not an individual. And I suspect that that's going to be more and more the case. A lot of park owners, you know, talk to Arthur on a regular basis and are letting him know that they're looking to get out of the business, but the kids are not interested in maintaining it. So, you know, trying to, I think the short, to abbreviate this a little, I think we're going to see a lot more park sales in the coming years of small parks that have deferred maintenance issues. And I think it would behoove us to keep that in mind as we're planning forward, because we have the potential of really undoing a lot of excellent work that's happened over the last couple of years, especially in getting new units online. If we see, you know, some of these naturally affordable units going away through attrition. And actually, Senator, one other thing I wanted to bring up, you'd asked about the administrative penalties and the like. We have yet to actually, since our department got the authority, which was back in, oh goodness, I think 2016 or so, 2017, to oversee. Prior to that point, the law was there, but if you didn't have a lawyer to enforce it, you know, to sue, then there wasn't a whole lot that a resident could do. Now we actually have the authority. The department has the authority to issue administrative penalties for infractions of certain infractions of the habitability laws. We've yet to actually have to administer any fees. We've done I would say a great job of sort of in the model of the Division of Fire Safety, working with residents, working with the park owners to get things remedied. We've certainly threatened to apply penalties, but have not had to do so yet. To my knowledge, the Attorney General, at least in my time, has not been involved in any mobile home cases. So that would be, you know, the last 15 years or so.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I would think that if an estate ends up owning the park, that would really make some of those timeline issues of when you have to notify the residents, how long they have to say that they're going to buy it, things like that. I would think that would complicate that.
So to be clear, the state of Vermont does not own any parks.
No, I said estate.
Oh, estate. Yeah.
Excuse
me. Yeah. It becomes very difficult. And, you know, Arthur, fortunately, you know, we've only had, I want to say 2, maybe 3 instances. You know, some of them try to offload it really quick and it's fine. There's one, and I'm blanking on the name of the park that we've been grappling with actually for the better part of a year now, with residents kind of taking over some of the responsibilities themselves, you know, paying for water, wastewater, that sort of thing, in the absence of any clear owner. Yeah, it gets real messy.
Good.
Well, I'll ask another question. Do the parks ever split into individual lots? I mean, I know it'd be hard with the utilities and stuff, but.
Very, very rarely, but it has happened. There have been instances where a park owner has individually sold off lots, and effectively closed a park that way. I know that there is a Spike off of Williston Woods, which is actually an age-restricted park, that is run by a homeowners association where each individual resident actually owns the parcel underneath them. It hasn't been done in a long, it would be really hard to do in an Act 250 world, because when you start subdividing like that, you know, you get into permitting issues pretty quickly.
A question. So is Act 250 an impediment? Or say Act 250 didn't cause a problem. Do you see that model as being something we should find a way to make easier to do?
Should we encourage individual lot ownership?
Yeah, or just make it easier for it to happen.
I would have to think it over, but my inclination is generally to say no, and mostly because of the infrastructure requirements. And I think, yeah, I'd have to give that some thought, actually.
Might be a real case by case, you know, some mobile home parks. But if you had five mobile homes and they had large lots, then it might be possible, but if they're crammed together and shared utilities and all that, it would be that much more difficult. It's an interesting topic, so, yeah, okay. Anything else? And those reports are on, can you describe a little bit how to get to those reports?
Sure. So if you go to accd.gov, and then navigate to housing, in the menu on the left, and there's actually a right under a couple links under housing, includes mobile home parks, and there's a bevy of information, and it's actually acc.vermont.gov/housing, and then there's a couple links for the mobile home parks page.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Feel better.
Yeah,
Thank you.
better. Okay, I wanted to, we're not going to make it by 3. I hope people can stay a little bit later, because I'd really like to get to narrowing down our focus on what we're going to cover in the next couple of months. First of all, let's do a quick review of our charge. There is a document on our website, again, under my name. I think it's task force charges. And I'll just read them. I guess I'll just go. I won't read them all. But anyway, the status of mobile home parks, that's pretty much what we just covered with Sean. And on the report, we would probably have a section for that, and we can expand it and put in things that we think are important to add to that. The condition and needs number 2 of mobile home parks, CDI has some information on that. But there is a limited amount of information that, especially on parks that are privately owned or not within or mobile homes that are not within a mobile home park. But that wouldn't be under number 2 because we're mostly talking about parks. But I have found some information on that, and I'll make that available and we can talk about that later. Current statutory treatment of mobile home parks as personal and real. We kind of covered a bunch of that today and have some questions. And we definitely have to address that because it's a very specific charge. Modern construction. Peter Schneider of Efficiency Vermont is going to give a presentation on that. Probably the next meeting or one after that, depending on how we schedule things. Type and scope of data. We had a little that from Sean, and we should think some more about anything else that needs to be added to that. And conversion, I think this is mostly for number 6 would be CDI and CDOEO. CDI can talk about this. That's some of the difficulties and good things that they've run into converting mobile home parks to cooperative ownership. So those are the charges. Let's look at, if it's all right, unless we have more discussion on that. like to look at the document I posted called Potential Task Force Items. These are the things that I've run into and I've talked to people over the last couple of weeks. That document is also on that reports and resources page. And I would primarily ask, so what sorts of roadblocks do you see? And which is really not, it's not really our charge. There wasn't a charge that said, find out what the roadblocks are to putting in more mobile home parks. But when we run into those, we might be able to put them in some of these other categories, specifically number one, which is our current status. We could say, this is our current status. Here's some of the problems we're running into as part of that section. So the first one, if I'll just crash on, the risk assessment tool, which I didn't know anything about before I started this. Most of you may be familiar with that. It's a way of primarily, I believe primarily it's flood resistant, flood resilience and things like that, or environmental issues having to do with flooding, which I gather it's a very good tool, but there's recommendations that it be used more, that it be expanded, that it be made easier to use. But is this one of our charges? Is that something that we should recommend or deal with it? And I don't know if I can fit it into any of these six. And if we can't, we can say at the end for further research, further items, somebody should look into the risk assessment tool.
Does that get into the broader conversation about notification of a potential home buyer of whether the home's in a flood hazard area or it's flood history?
Yeah.
So that's a kind of broader discussion, certainly.
Yeah. Can you put that in it? I'd like to be able to find one of those 6 slots to slide it into so that we could, when we're thinking of the report, we can say, here's where we would put it. But it's certainly an issue because I gather many mobile home people who purchase mobile homes do not know they're in a risk, hazard, river hazard situation. So we can think about that one. It's not easily put into one of those 6, but.
Would it fit into number 5, the type and scope of data? That sentence ends with, and useful information for policy decisions, which is, I feel like probably gives the committee pretty broad latitude.
Yeah. Okay, we can probably do that. Number 2 on my list is real estate versus personal property. That obviously fits in it. How deep we should go into this. If you look at that document sometime that I posted, it does get pretty complicated when you start getting into taxing policy and all these things. There's a lot of cross references between different portions of law. I hope to create a document that makes that more readable over the next week or so. Because we really do have to get into that fairly deeply in order to understand it, I think.
Can I ask a question on that? What is the policy issue that we're trying to solve with this focus? Is it around financing of homes? Is it around that piece of the financing institution determining whether it's real or personal property, or is it an unfair allocation of taxes? I'm just trying to figure out what is the perspective and angle we're taking when taking up this question.
I'm not sure.
Right. What I was going to say was, I don't know where the problem is in that. That's one reason I asked that question. And I hesitate to go super deep until we know more about why that's here. And what I can do is contact other folks on the Economic Development Committee who, we're the ones who wrote this. So I can contact them and find out exactly why, or you can, if you like.
Go ahead, because Mary, you had something to add? Was your hand up?
Yeah, I think on that question about real versus personal property from the individual mobile home park owner, that's a very significant question. And I don't think I haven't heard anybody care about the tax implications about it.
So can I follow up? So Mary, is the question what you said before about, are we letting the financial institutions decide whether they're personal or real
Right.
estate?
Right. If you're in a park, you know, one bank might give you a mortgage and another bank won't,
Okay, so,
just
I mean-
because you're in a park.
okay, so it's the, implementation of those rules.
Right,
That's the issue and who decides.
right.
Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward
Yeah,
problem.
we could bring in somebody from the banking association and
Right.
get their perspective on that.
Right. And Mary,
forgive-
you can probably provide us examples of like banks without naming names, but just examples of real life scenarios, because it's really helpful to me at least to have a real story and a real situation.
Yeah,
It,
well,
it
I
sounds
know,
like you're familiar with us.
yeah, Brattleboro Savings and Loan sometimes gives mortgages. I don't know what their criteria are, but, you know, so I know a couple of people who actually have real estate mortgages, but only a couple. And, you know, other people have wanted to like refinance their house to be able to do some upgrades and haven't been able to get a reasonable loan.
Okay, that's really helpful. Sean?
I was just gonna say, forgive me, folks, I do need to step off actually to go meet with some folks from the governor's office about removal of flood affected mobile homes. So it's a
Okay.
mobile home kind of afternoon. So thank you all, and I look forward to hopefully being more engaged at the next meeting.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Done.
So I'll reach out to the banking association and get some information on that.
Right.
too. So I guess we don't need to really dive too deeply into that. I'll probably do it myself, just so I'll see if there's any issues that are buried in there that might come up. But maybe as a task force, we don't need to get too much testimony on the real.
It's depending on what we find out.
Yeah, it seems to be that question, that piece is actually asking, what are the barriers to financing for people in parks who want to get into a better quality, access the value of their home? And that's a big and important question.
Okay. Number 3, a 5 or 10-year plan. I like this idea. I want it, but I don't know whether it fits into any of our charges. Because I would like to think about it. It's just the way that I function. I like deadlines. I like measurable waypoints and things like that. And you could see some of my sort of suggestions there. But I don't know if this is actually part of our charge. Get some opinions on that, if you have any.
I mean, it could go in number 1, just, I mean, that's the status, you know, do we want is the status acceptable? If it's not acceptable, we could do, you know, and I don't see us writing a plan, but I see us suggesting a plan. I mean, that could be on a list of suggestions.
Okay, yeah, that would. More research. Future work. The other thing that a lot of people several people have mentioned is some sort of because there are so many programs that seem to pop up every week, I find an acronym. I always get that word wrong, acronyms. For different programs, for loans, for grants, for help, various sorts. Massachusetts, I believe, has a one-stop loan grant application process, but then it gets you routed to the various partners in that process. So that, yeah, I think it would be good to do that, but I don't know whether it's part of our charges again. And that could be, you might be able to squeeze that into the first one with the status of mobile homes, just as a problem that people are running into in their current status or.
Well, I think as the kind of look at the status of mobile homes, mobile home parks, as we do that status analysis, we're gonna see a lot of needs that need to be met. And so that section can end with these are the resources out there to address the needs. Here are some of the barriers to accessing the resources. Here's a recommendation to remove the barrier, which would be a one-stop shop.
That would work. Okay. Licensing of mobile home parks. There are some states that do that. Vermont does not. And so it's kind of, I think it's an intriguing idea to me because it gives, it's possible to therefore have some leverage over getting improvements done in mobile home parks, saying, in order to be licensed, you have to have this. And then to flip that, you'd say, if you are licensed, you get these benefits. And those benefits could be tax breaks or something else, some other sorts of incentives to balance out the extra cost and overhead of doing a licensing. But it's another one that I looked at this morning. I was kind of going through these saying, okay, where do these fit if they do? And it's another one that doesn't quite fit into our charge, but could be mentioned as something to think about.
Well, I would question what problem licensing would solve. I mean, if mobile home parks had been licensed 60 years ago, maybe we wouldn't be facing the problems we're facing now, but I'm not sure what good it would do at this point.
Right, and I had the thought just that they are required to register, and we do have requirements on how they operate to some extent. So we might be able to solve the issue with existing mechanisms. And just the word licensing kind of
I understand.
isn't always a friendly word to folks.
No, I agree.
You know, we have a certain amount of energy and political capital, and so it might just be challenging.
Yeah.
But I think looking at our regulations and looking at strengthening those very specifically and strategically would be great. And I like the idea of tax incentives. People love tax incentives.
Mhm.
But I think we could put it in our existing statutes. Because I honestly, I hadn't realized until I was on this task force how much they are regulated.
Okay.
I think that just makes me think of the sixth charge of the task force to look at the capacity for conversion to cooperative ownership and any kind of barriers to allowing cooperatives to organize and get up and running. And I wouldn't want an added level of regulation to be a barrier for a cooperative that's trying to form. So we'd really want to make sure that as we're thinking of things like that, we want to bring in the voice of cooperatives to understand where are the regulations helpful, where are they a barrier.
Well, let's put that as not very important at this point. But we can.
Or we can look at, I mean, what does Massachusetts do in its licensing? What does Connecticut do? What does Maine do? I mean, the
Yep.
specifics of how they manage those parks, I mean, that could be very helpful. But it's also a big task.
Yeah. Yep. Mary, you agree with those?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. We can do that. Emergency preparedness plans, apparently there's a lack of those. And the statute encourages them, but doesn't require.
I believe they are part of the town emergency plans. Every town has an emergency plan, so the town plan should include those. I don't know that for sure. But we can check on that. But also, the folks in this realm Sean's just going to a meeting now, are talking about mobile homes and resiliency and that getting out of the floodplain and what do you do when a flood is coming. So I think we should just, I can just talk to the town folks, the emergency management people, and it's the regional commissions who do those plans. And see if mobile home parks are included. I suspect they are.
Specifically, I think the plan, if you have a mobile home park in your municipality, you should specifically.
I would hope they are. If they're not, to me, that would be an easy legislative challenge, to the extent that that is legislation, because, so how some of the things are in rules.
Yeah, yeah.
But I really hope they are.
And you think various towns or the regional planning commissions, we can ask them?
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to do that?
Sure. That would be great.
Okay. I'll just ask the person at the Wyndham Regional Commission how they're treated.
Whether whether there's anything specific to mobile home parks.
Right, because honestly, I would rather have, just as a point of good, who can do what, I'd rather have the regional commissions or the towns be either helping or writing those plans for the parks, rather than depending on the parks to come up with that themselves, because it can get pretty complicated.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the regional commissions coordinate with the state on that too. And I'm sure we've learned a lot from the floods again. So we can make sure that the folks who are looking at updating those plans include mobile homes in the plans.
Number 7, appropriations. Several people have said, well, more money for CVOE, more money for this, more money for that. And which is always being on Ways and Means. It makes me say, that's a heavy lift. But if we can come up with good reasons for why that sort of more funding is needed, that would be good. And we could put that in somehow. If that fits into part of our, it's not really part of our charge is to say where budgeting information is, but I don't know. Other thoughts on that? What do we do with requests from, or we could put it in the end and say these specific programs have worked fairly well. They could be more funded, receive more. It would be helpful to have them to receive more funding.
I think that is squarely number 5, type of data and opportunities to make the data and information more centralized, accessible, and useful for informing policy decisions. We have just put a lot of money into mobile homes, and especially just recently. So I think it would be really helpful to hear from, honestly, people on our own committee, to hear from Polly, hear from Sean, to hear from CVOEO about what types of funding have been most helpful. I really think we have the people on the committee to tell us that, and then you folks can, if there's other folks we should talk to.
Go ahead.
The Mobile Home Subcommittee of the Affordable Housing Coalition, or the Housing and Homeless Alliance, is working on what their priorities are for the next legislative session, which will include what programs they feel should be funded going forward, where they want to put the emphasis for funding.
Are you on that committee, Mary?
Oh, of course.
Okay,
I'm on
good.
Mobile Homes all the time.
You
So is
can-
Polly.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, there's I was talking to Megan Roush about that committee, and there's quite a bit of overlap. And I was thinking, we really should be able to work together with that group to some extent. I've been reading through the minutes of that group, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. So it would be good to share information back and forth. I'm going to at least zoom in, or however they do it for the next meeting. And I'll send out an email for other people who want to. They are public, are they?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So we could do it.
And they're Zoomed.
Yeah, oh, okay. But yeah, that looked like a good group, and from the minutes, they were knowledgeable and very, very helpful. But so that would be good. Their opinion on that would be good too. Especially if we can put together some backup information, CVOE or CDI has helped these many parks resolve these many conflicts, things like that. Some backup data of what's been done. So we can work on that and get it into number 5. Project timelines, just how long it takes to get, especially fairly large infrastructure projects, which is a problem for everyone, even not even in the mobile home space, but it would be good to be able to speed that up to some extent, but I don't know how to do that, and I don't know whether that fits into our charge. So any thoughts on that?
Well, the housing bill that we just passed has some, quite a bit of language about increasing, speeding up timelines. I mean, most importantly, by making certain things now, you can't, towns can't prohibit, duplexes, that kind of thing. So that speeds up the timeline because there's not a separate process for that. And then there were some changes on local appeals, not Act 250 appeals, but local appeals. That would speed up the process of housing generally, which I would think would apply to mobile homes. And then there's also sections where areas are identified all throughout the state, the zoning district, or not zoning districts, there's 5 categories of, the downtown district, historic district designation that for the next 3 years, you can, developers can develop more easily without Act 250. There's more units that you can provide without Act 250. Now that didn't say mobile homes, but it might apply. So
I wonder if, so, I guess in our experience working with parks, a lot of the investment needs are on the infrastructure side. And less on the kind of siting new homes. And that's what we see takes a lot of time. So there might be a point in this process that we bring in someone from ANR to talk about their work with infrastructure projects in parks and the role they play there. And if they see any places along the development process where we can tighten up the timeline.
see, that's what it is. And so that's water and sewer in particular, right?
And
Yeah.
rivers,
I'm sorry?
and rivers.
Right, and stormwater, yes.
So can we, is there a charge, one of the charges that we can put in the bucket, we can put that in?
Well, I mean, the data for, useful for informing policy decisions. I mean, if there are specific suggestions for how to change processes, that to me is information useful for informing policy decisions.
Yeah. That's useful for informing policy decisions. It opens up quite a bit.
Yeah. Right, but I mean, to me, that's the most important one, honestly, because when we have to spend session time to understand the background and just what's happening, it's really hard.
Okay. So we can still do something like that. Naming conventions, most people say this is not all that important. So I don't know whether I would spend a lot of time worrying about that now, just whether it's a mobile home park, whether it's a manufactured housing community, or whether it's what in statute. And I was more concerned with what's in statute, whether we need to change than what they're called in statute. And I haven't found, there's some psychological or there's some perception impact when it's called a mobile home park as opposed to a manufactured housing community. But I don't know whether it's something we need to deal with.
Sean is probably the best person to answer this, but I also think HUD's definitions intersect here and probably limit our latitude in which words we choose for statute.
Yeah, but that's That's kind of the problem, that they refer to them as manufactured homes after, what, 76, if they're made after 76. So, and we're referring to them as mobile homes throughout our statute. Should we change that in order to conform with that?
I think when we say mobile homes, everybody knows what we're talking about. People who actually live in them, in my experience, mostly call them trailers. And I see funders now starting to say, what is it? Manufactured housing communities, which always makes me wonder what they're talking about.
Okay. Maybe we should leave it alone for a while.
Yes.
I'm looking at 4 more meetings, so I'm trying to think of what we could cut.
Yeah.
Rather than, so I don't, in terms of importance, I don't think that's a high one, but we could keep it in the back of our head. And number 10, further work. I added that.
Oh, yeah, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, that was added this morning or something. Because I've looking through those notes, the minutes from, the subcommittee that you were here on, there was talk of changing statutes such that DEC would allow more access to their revolving loans, or make it easier for people other than municipalities to apply for or receive those revolving loan funds for drinking water, wastewater. But I actually I didn't see a good pocket for that in our charge either. The statutory changes are not really emphasized in the charges, but we do make recommendations, and the report, because it talks about the report. It's all right.
I think,
Go ahead, Mary. Yes.
okay, I think the revolving loan funds fit under number 2 about the conditions and needs for infrastructure. You can't do anything about the infrastructure if you can't access the funding.
Okay.
It seems to me funding is not specifically called out anywhere in here, and especially if we're going to be thinking about funding and acknowledging appropriations asks. We shouldn't acknowledge appropriations asks without analyzing the existing sources that are out there and programmatic changes that could make them work better for these communities. So I think we need to find one of these charges where we can slot in an analysis of the funding environment and potential policy changes within it.
Right, I'd say number 5.
Yeah,
Useful for informing policies.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the whole point of the committee, to me, is to tee us up for
Okay,
making policy decisions. And it's not, I shouldn't say that, that's not the whole charge, but that's a big one
okay,
to me.
okay. Well, then, with that in mind, let's look at the next 4 meetings and figure out what should be covered in each and when they might be. This is the end of September. The next meeting I was thinking of would have Peter would come in and talk about construction, modern mobile home construction. That's specifically one of our charges. So he would take up some of that meeting. Questions for the next meeting?
I think just in Peter's conversation, it'd be good to understand the price differentials between the different levels of manufactured home, the ZEM, the zero, the Energy Star, the standard. Yeah.
And the Vermont is gone, right? Is it Vermont? Well, it'd be interesting to know, just an update on the Vermont. I mean, that was a hot thing 5 years ago, 7 years ago.
That's a ZEM, the zero energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that would be next meeting and with Peter. Do you want to? I should be able to get the banking association somebody to come in from here by then. So we can hit that. Real estate versus loans. Loans with regard to real property versus personal property.
And maybe Mary can speak to it, but I wonder if we want to, while we have the Bankers Association and talking about this issue, if we also want the perspective of a park resident who's seen it from the other side to talk about it. I don't know if that's kind of like someone from CDI who can talk about the issue more broadly, or someone from CDOEO or a specific resident. I just want to make sure we're having both the financer's perspective and the homeowner's perspective.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We've been having trouble trying to get a park resident onto this task force. But we might be able to by then. CDI's working on it.
Yeah, I think CDOEO would be a great place to start asking who can speak to this.
Okay,
I recognize that Sandrine is no longer on the call and I just volunteer her.
I know, I would actually like her to give us her summary of the situation too.
yeah, because she deals more with individual owners of parks, doesn't she?
Residents, yeah.
Residents.
Well, they just deal with all sorts of mobile home issues,
Yeah.
is my understanding. And I would just really appreciate their overall summary of what's happening and where we can be most useful.
Okay, you want me to try to do that for the next meeting?
I think so, just be, and just let her know, you know, we're talking about funding, and this, and the property issues and data and, financing. I mean, financing might not be something that she has a lot of opinions on, but who knows? You know, I just think it's really important that we get from the folks who are in the field their assessment of what's most important.
Yep, okay. 2 weeks from now,
Oh, maybe.
will that work? I think that's probably enough for one meeting. That's probably at least,
And then Mary, do you feel like we're going in the right direction?
Yeah, I can't guarantee that this is accurate. I have in my calendar that the Affordable Housing Coalition Mobile Home Committee is meeting the 13th, but I can't swear to it. That's
It's
still,
on my calendar too.
oh, okay, well then it probably is real.
Well, we might all want to zoom in too.
yeah, oh, I will.
Yeah.
Well, you could, yeah, that, which is fine, but I can't sit through many hours of Zoom meetings.
Yeah. Well, we would,
No, and I wasn't suggesting that. I was just saying it would be good for this committee to know when that committee is meeting so that we
Yes.
can look.
Yes, absolutely.
why don't we have ours shortly after theirs?
Sure.
It's like the week 15th, Monday?
16th, yeah.
Well, yeah, 16th.
I think I can do in the morning. I have something in the afternoon.
Okay. 10,
10 would work.
and how early in the afternoon is your other committee?
It is actually 12:30, but I'm holding 3 places for them, so I can check back with them.
Because this might go for 2.5.
Right. I think that's fine. I think 2 hours is honestly not, I can easily go longer, especially if I'm driving up here.
Oh,
It's more worth my time to,
Okay.
other people can go 3 hours.
let's do 10 o'clock on the 16th for the next meeting, and we'll cover those 3 things that we just mentioned. And then after that, I'm also trying to figure out when we need, and maybe you could help out on this, Eric, when the report's given. For the person who's going to be writing the report, when would they want a final rough draft or something? You know, we're looking at January 15th when it's supposed to be done. We want to be able to have a rough draft that we can give to maybe some people and have them look through it. Need some polishing of it. We've got Christmas and things like that coming around at the end of December.
not unusual to have a rough draft, say mid-December. Then that gives that time to be circulated. And then sometimes when reports are got by our office, the first couple of weeks of January, it might be circulated again, and there might be additional sort of changes that people want to make. That gives you time. I'm not sure when the first day of session is this year, but
I think it's the 3rd, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, so that will give you some time after everybody's back to, continue to make changes to that need to be. But a first rough draft, maybe mid-December-ish,
December.
15th, something of that nature.
Okay. And so we should have a meeting at that point to make sure that we have the rough draft. Would the rough draft be presented to us kind of, or we would be picking through the rough draft on the 15th?
Well, it's done, I've seen that done either way. There are some times when what you just described is the kind of sequence of events that you have a rough draft that a committee will look at a meeting. But on the other hand, especially when it sort of depends on how much time the committee needs to get sort of what it wants to be able to provide directions to be in the report. So I've also seen it done where the committee meets in mid-December and says, all right, here's what we want the rough draft to have in it, fairly itemized at that point, gets drafted out to you guys first week of January. And that gives you a couple weeks to make changes multiple times. So you'll be back in the building too. So nothing prohibiting you.
2 weeks to actually put the thing together from the mid-December to the 1st of January.
Childcare pickup.
Yeah, roughly. Yep. I think that sounds right. Yeah, that's one option. But as you say, another option, it sort of depends what you're thinking as to, how much in detail, how voluminous do you think it's going to be?
Well, let's shoot for that and see how it works out.
For December 15th.
To have bullet point, more than bullet points, but paragraphs for what each section of the report is going to have in it. And all our research or our backup pretty much done by then, so that we can hand that over to, we'll be working with you all along the way. But,
Sure.
But at that point, say, this is pretty much what it's going to cover. Give us a final rough draft first of January.
Okay.
Does that seem reasonable?
Only thing I'd say is rather than 1st of January, do a little few days after that. So that it's not right on, the holiday. Would you say the first day is when? The 3rd, first day of session?
First day session is 3rd or Wednesday.
Wednesday. So maybe Friday, the 5th? Is that what that would be?
Yeah.
That'll give you 10 days to kind of continue to make further changes if you need to. Like you take the first draft on the 5th, then you got 10 days to, you could even schedule it doesn't have to, I know the committee has a maximum 4 meetings, but you could still meet informally, maybe if you wanted to during that time. Everybody's going to be here anyway.
Okay.
Look at another draft or two, depending on how many changes you wanted to make to the first one.
Okay.
Does that seem feasible?
Yep.
Yep.
And if we need information, data, do we do that ourselves or do you all help us find information?
It depends on the type, if it's say data on, say, like, for example, Sean was talking today about data, numbers of parks in the state, number of residents, that sort of thing. Usually we would get that, hopefully you would get that through your testimony during the course of your meetings. And then I've been taking notes and they're recorded as well so that, when we're writing it, you can refer to oh, hey, remember we got this so-and-so or so-and-so had a handout. We had a handout come in from this witness. That's got some data in it you can use in the report. So that usually when I've written reports, it'll be a combination of notes I've taken, handouts that have come in from witnesses, but also, like you were saying, the committee, I think by the time you've got your last meeting, usually has a pretty good sense of kind of what they want to see in the report and what you can refer to back up your findings.
Okay.
So hopefully, most times when it's data, it comes in from the witnesses.
Okay.
Been my observation.
Okay, that's helpful.
But legal research, we can do that for sure too. I don't know how much there would be necessarily in this committee, but but anyway, we can do any of that.
Support J files.
Right. Right.
I talked to Catherine Bennett a little bit, because so I said, what can we ask for? What can't we ask for? And she said, well, if you come up with something, talk to Marie Belladu, who is our representative. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you might be JFS.
And you can say, well, it's going to take a lot, or yeah, I can do that. And let them decide whether it's something that warrants
Okay.
deeper work, but.
Okay, so like, as an example, say we wanted to know the number of water and sewer grants that were given to mobile homes.
So we could dig around and try to find that. We get it probably from A&R. We could get that, but if you had a proposal, some sort of revenue proposal or something of that nature, that's where it might get complicated. So we'd have to do a little bit of discussion in our office to see what would be involved.
Okay. Could you give us any suggestions for data? Like questions we might ask at this point? Not necessarily now, but in a meeting. Would you be able to, based on what we've learned so far and what our charges are, tell us what you would recommend we look for or ask?
Yeah, I would try to get some information on how the money that's already been appropriated, if this was mentioned,
Yes.
how that's been spent and, what the observations have been by like the HCB, the various entities that are granting funds for
Okay.
mobile home, replacement or there's various things that monies have been appropriated for. I would just want to find out what is happening on the ground now, what the experience has been, and if those people have any recommendations for where you'd get the most bang for the buck moving forward if you were to find any additional money.
Okay,
That's the
perfect.
kind of thing I would look at.
Perfect.
And you can do that.
Well, so you could have some, you have members on your committee that might be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the source of the information.
Hmm.
I can give you a summary of the dollars that have been appropriated, so I could do that. But, what's happening with those dollars, that's something that you'd have to get the experts in the housing to help you with.
Right.
Well, that would be good to have a summary of what
Yeah.
dollars are going to mobile homes and mobile home park.
Yeah,
Program.
that's what I was just doing while you were talking, I was looking through the budget and a bill that was passed on last session. There's various other things that I can try to dig up,
Oh, but
get a little summary document pulled together.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So then we can stick you on the witness list. She can be on the witness list, right?
Sure.
Is that how we?
also, time.
Yeah.
But as far as the actual, how the dollars are being used, I mean, that I'd really encourage you to talk to certain experts that are on the ground.
Oh, definitely.
Would the recipients, some of that money, if it's been granted to a recipient, could they be witnesses or are they on the committee already?
People
I don't,
that are administrative fund,
yeah,
yeah,
Right.
yes,
Exactly.
yeah,
Right, which is Polly, and
Yeah.
then, yeah.
so I think you have your people, right?
Yeah. Let's get one more meeting scheduled, aside from the 2 weeks from now.
We can try, but there's only 3 of us now
Yeah.
here, but we can have a target,
Yeah.
sure.
Sure. And some idea what we might cover in that meeting. If possible. There isn't an easy one. Well, I did want to have CDI talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put them in for end of October, 2 weeks. So after that, that would be the second one, November. Then we could have, or should we make it a little longer and then we're gonna have one in December for the report, mid-December to finalize the report. Maybe one at the end of November.
Yes, okay, right, so also we have October, I think we should do earlier in November, right?
Okay.
Maybe 2 weeks after the 16th, that week. maybe November 3rd, if, I don't know folks like Fridays, I mean, our meetings have been on Fridays. I don't know what people's schedules are.
Well, we'll just come up with some and see what people think. Well, December 1st is the ledge briefing, 33rd, 20th.
What about November 3rd? That Friday?
November 3rd, yep. Sure. Let's target that. We can see what people think. Morning or afternoon make a difference to you?
Morning does, yes, please.
Morning on Friday, 3rd. Topics to cover CDI, would report on number 6 or talk about number 6, the conversion.
Oh, right. Yeah, and Mary you have tons of experience on the conversion, right?
Actually, no,
Oh,
Tri-Park's been around for 30 years before I ever joined the board.
Uh,
oh, so the current issues are not from conversion. The current issues are just current issues.
Actually,
Well-
the current issues are pre-conversion mostly. Well, the infrastructure issues are pre-conversion. The flood resilience issues are current.
Okay, I just think the Tri-Park story is a really important story for this board to, this committee to hear about. Or do you, Mary? Am I?
I don't know. Well, I told Representative Taylor about it whenever it was he came down.
yeah.
I lose days. And I'm sure Polly knows about it. And I think probably everybody else knows about it from their jobs.
Okay,
But
all right. Well, I
should-
guess I think it would be helpful to have a public statement of what folks who are in that, you and anyone you would recommend, if there are things that the state can do to avoid those kind of situations or to help the process happen with less angst and conflict.
Okay, well, let's leave that.
Well,
I think
I can tag team with CDI about that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah, that might be good. And we might need to come back with the personal versus real property issue during that meeting. We're not going to be able to
Okay.
nail it all down in one, I don't think. So let's leave the rest of that. We'll try to schedule CDI for that and leave the rest of it at that agenda, not specific yet. Yeah. Does that sound all right?
Sure, yes.
And I think I'm happy with, we just get 2 more meetings on those 2 on the calendar. And then we can see what,
So we'll send something out to see if everybody can make it.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Okay,
great.
Good.
anything else need to be covered today?
I don't think so.